I was standing at the kitchen counter that October morning, cradling my favorite chipped mug, steam curling up from the coffee the way mist rises off Lake Tahoe on a cool day. The leaves outside had just begun to shift, red and gold scattering across the shoreline like a painter's careless brush strokes. The house was quiet except for the faint creak of the old floorboards, the same creak I'd heard my entire life. Then the phone rang. I remember the exact sound, too sharp, too abrupt, the kind of ring that makes you feel something's coming. I picked it up, expecting it to be my daughter, or maybe the local librarian calling about the history project I'd been helping with. Instead, I heard my son's voice. Lucas. We're married now, Mom. Madison and I tied the knot last weekend. Listen, we like to spend our honeymoon at the lake house. 2 months, maybe a little more. Can you have the keys sent today? It took me a moment to process the words. No, hello, no, how are you?
Just that.
My fingers tightened on the mug until the ceramic pressed into my skin. Married? I finally managed. You got married? Yeah, it was a small thing. Spontaneous. You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway. His tone was light, dismissive, as if this was all perfectly reasonable. Madison's been dreaming of staying at the lake house. The peace, the scenery, it's exactly the kind of healing getaway we need. We'll drive up tomorrow. I stared out the window at the water, the place where my father taught me to steer the rowboat when I was barely big enough to hold the oars, where my husband, David, and I would watch the moonlight dance over the lake in the years before cancer took him. This wasn't just a house. It was a repository of everything I held dear, every triumph, every loss, every moment of family forgiveness and reconciliation. Lucas, I said carefully, I haven't even met Madison. Wouldn't it be nice for the two of you to come for dinner first? We could celebrate properly.
He sighed.
There's no time for that. Madison's got commitments later in the year. This is our only window. It's just a house, Mom. You can stay at your condo in San Francisco. Just a house. He didn't understand, or maybe he didn't care, that these walls had absorbed decades of laughter and tears, that the floors had felt the patter of his little feet, that this was the place where his father had drawn his last breath in my arms. And what about Emma and Chloe? I asked, reminding him of his nieces. They're coming for their summer visit next week, as always. They can skip a year, or stay somewhere else. I felt that familiar weight settle over me. The weight of being the peacekeeper, the one who yielded, who smoothed over the disruptions caused by Lucas's impulsive decisions. I'd carried that weight for years, especially since David died. But that morning, something shifted inside me. Perhaps it was the sheer audacity of his request, or the complete disregard for the bonds that tie a family together. Or maybe it was simply that at 68 years old, I'd reached the point where elderly wisdom whispered, enough. I need to think about it, I told him. What's there to think about, he said. It's the family house. I'm family. But my gut told me this wasn't just about a honeymoon. There was something else here, a shadow under the surface of his words. And if there's one thing life teaches you, it's to pay attention to the shadows. After we hung up, I stood for a long time in the kitchen, my hand resting on the edge of the counter, the lake spread out before me. My father used to tell me, Evelyn, some storms you can see coming, others you feel in your bones. This was one of the latter. So I made 2 calls. The first was to Daniel Rhodes, an old friend of David's, a retired investigator who still handled discreet matters for people who knew where to find him. The second was to my attorney, Harper Lee, who had been handling my affairs for over 2 decades. Harper, I said when she picked up, I need to discuss some immediate changes to my estate plans. By the time I hung up, a plan had begun to take shape. If Lucas and Madison wanted access to the lake house, they were going to get something far more valuable first, the truth. And I would find out what, exactly, my new daughter-in-law wanted, and why she wanted it so badly. 3 days later, Daniel slid a manila envelope across the small cafe table where we were meeting. You were right to trust your instincts, he said. Inside, I found pages of background on Madison Brooks, born Madeline Burke in a small Midwestern town, legally changed her name at 23, shed her accent, crafted an entirely new image. A short-lived acting career, a few commercials, one indie film, and a pattern of relationships with older, established men who could offer career leverage or financial gain. Each relationship ended abruptly once she got what she wanted. But the part that made my pulse quicken was recent. Meetings with a luxury resort developer, discussions about converting private lakefront properties into boutique hotels. And the most recent? Just 2 weeks earlier, Madison had met with them at a restaurant in San Francisco, blueprints spread out on the table. Her target, Daniel said quietly, isn't just the house. It's what the house could become. In that moment, the flicker of suspicion in my chest became a roaring fire. She hadn't married Lucas for love, at least not the kind that lasts. She'd married him for access. And if she thought she could dismantle this family's legacy, she was about to learn just how stubborn an old woman with a lifetime of elderly wisdom stories could be. I left the cafe with Daniel's envelope tucked under my arm like a fragile piece of evidence from a courtroom drama, the kind where you already know the verdict before the jury even deliberates. The air outside carried that crisp bite that only late October in Tahoe can deliver, cool enough to sting your cheeks, but with the promise of winter still lingering on the horizon. I walked slowly toward my car, every step heavy with the weight of what I had just learned. Madison's life, once stripped of the glossy surface, was exactly the kind of cautionary tale you hear in elderly wisdom stories. A restless climb from small-town obscurity to carefully curated sophistication. Strategic romances with men who opened doors she couldn't pry open herself. And now my son, my only son, neatly positioned as the final rung on her ladder. When I got home, the lake was still, like it was holding its breath. I set the envelope on the dining room table and made myself a cup of chamomile tea, the same kind David used to drink before bed. I remember thinking how much I wished I could talk to him now, hear his calm voice sorting through the storm. Instead, I called Harper. "Harper, I've decided," I told her. "I want a lake house placed into a trust immediately. The beneficiaries will be Emma and Chloe, with my daughter Rachel as trustee until they're 30. And I want an ironclad clause that prevents any sale or commercial development of the property. Ever. Are you sure?" Harper's voice carried both caution and respect. "This will bypass Lucas entirely. I'm sure. It's not punishment. It's protection. This house isn't just wood and stone. It's the heartbeat of our family." By the end of the day, the paperwork was in motion. That night, I sat at the writing desk in the corner of my bedroom, the one where I'd pen letters to David when he was away on business, and began writing to Lucas. I didn't want a letter filled with accusation that would only push him deeper into Madison's grasp. No, this would be a letter about legacy, about what it means to be a Harper, about why some things can't be replaced or bought or rebuilt. When I finished, I placed the letter into a smaller box along with 2 other items. 1. The trust documents, fresh from Harper's office, spelling out in unmistakable language that the lake house was no longer his to claim. 2. Daniel's full report on Madison, every meeting, every alias, every whispered conversation caught in the hum of a restaurant's background noise. These went inside an antique wooden chest that had belonged to my grandmother, its brass hinges worn from decades of opening and closing. I tied it shut with a silk ribbon and attached a small card, a wedding gift, to be opened together. The next morning, I drove into the city. Lucas lived in a sleek loft downtown, all glass and steel, and not a single item that carried a memory older than 6 months. He wasn't home, so I left the chest with the doorman, a polite young man who didn't hide his curiosity. On the drive back to Tahoe, I felt the kind of quiet resolve that only comes when you know you've done the right thing, even if it's the harder thing. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the mountains and turned the lake into molten gold, my phone rang. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" Lucas's voice was sharp, rattled. Behind him, I could hear Madison, her voice shrill, words indistinct but full of fury. "Something crashed, maybe a glass." "I sent you a wedding gift," I said calmly. "I take it you've opened it. You've destroyed my marriage." "No," I replied. "I simply showed you the truth. What you do with it is up to you." "She says it's all lies, that you had her followed, that you fabricated." Lucas, I interrupted, I don't fabricate evidence. Every detail is documented. And if you doubt it, you're welcome to confirm with Daniel yourself. There was silence on the other end, then a muffled argument between the two of them. Finally, Lucas came back on the line, his voice lower, tighter. You changed the trust. Cut me out completely. I protected the house from anyone who sees it as a business opportunity rather than a family home. That includes Madison. And yes, that means it will pass directly to your nieces. They've spent every summer of their lives here. They understand its value. You had no right. I had every right. The house is mine, Lucas. Not yours.
Not yet.
And now, not ever. It wasn't cruelty that made me say it so plainly. It was truth. After we hung up, I stood at the terrace window for a long time, watching the waves lap against the shore. My father used to say that life has 3 acts, and it's in the 3rd act where you find out who you really are. I wasn't sure yet what this act would reveal about Lucas, but I knew what it was revealing about me. I was done being the person who smoothed over every rough edge at the expense of my own boundaries. The next morning, Rachel called. Lucas rang me last night, she said. Sounded frantic. Told me you've turned the lake house over to the girls. I have. There was a pause, then a note of quiet pride in her voice. Good for you, Mom. Rachel, I need you to know, this isn't about pushing your brother away. It's about preserving what Dad and I built, what Grandpa started. It's about making sure Emma and Chloe inherit not just property, but the stories, the laughter, the healing this place has seen. That's exactly why you should be the one holding the pen on this chapter, she said softly. I hung up feeling lighter. But I also knew this wasn't over. Madison was the type who wouldn't go quietly, and Lucas was still tangled in whatever web she'd spun. The thing about elderly wisdom is that it's not just about knowing when to act. It's about knowing when to brace for the storm that follows. And as I poured myself another cup of coffee, the lake shifting under the first hints of an autumn wind, I could almost feel the storm clouds gathering. Some storms you can see coming. Others, you feel in your bones. And I was feeling this one, in every bone I had. I didn't sleep much after the call. The lake kept up its slow breathing against the rocks, in and out, like a meditation I couldn't join. I left the bedroom window cracked, the October air cool enough to make my knuckles ache, and my thoughts feel sharper than I wanted them to be. When the first bands of pale light crept over the ridge, I made oatmeal the old way, steel cut on the stove, a handful of raisins, a pinch of cinnamon, as if ritual could steady the ground under my feet. By 9, I'd stacked firewood by the back porch, checked the smoke alarms, and made a grocery list I didn't need. I was doing what widows do when they feel a tremor, touch the edges of the world to prove it's still there. The phone buzzed with a text I didn't recognize. Unknown number. This isn't how a mother behaves. Give us the keys. We'll be gone before Thanksgiving. I didn't reply. A minute later, another ping. Unknown number. You're making this harder than it has to be. I forwarded both messages to Daniel and to Harper. Harper responded first. Don't engage. The trust instruments are recorded. You're protected. Protected legally, yes. But the heart is another jurisdiction. At 10:30, the landline rang. Only Rachel and the dentist used the landline. Mom, Rachel said, skipping hello. Lucas just posted an Instagram story from his loft. Champagne glasses. I saw Madison's reflection in the window. The caption says, Love wins. Tahoe next. I don't care about social media optics, but the phrase Tahoe next hit like a wave of cold water. It meant they weren't just asking. They were announcing. They were treating my home like an itinerary item between Napa and Palm Springs. All right, I said, surprising myself with how even I sounded. Then we should set the table. For them? For the truth. I spent the early afternoon drafting another letter, this one shorter, firmer. Then I called Lucas. He answered on the 4th ring. Mom, I'm busy. You can be busy with spaghetti tonight, I said. 6:30. Lake house. Just you. We'll talk like grown-ups. I'm not coming without Madison. Then you aren't coming, I said, and I let the silence do the work. When you get older, You learn how powerful silence can be, one of those small pieces of elderly wisdom no one tells you about because you have to earn it. I'll be there, he said finally, clipped as a signature. I cooked the meal he used to ask for after Little League. Spaghetti and meatballs, salad with too much crouton, garlic bread that left the kitchen loud with butter and memory. I set 2 plates, 2 cloth napkins, and a last-minute addition, David's old pocket compass, right in the center, pointing north. My husband used to put it on the table whenever a hard family talk was coming. So we remember where true north is, he'd say, tapping the glass with a grin. When Lucas arrived, he hesitated on the front step the way he did at 17, when curfew was a moving target and apologies came hard. He looked handsome the way young men do when they sleep badly, jawline rigid, shoulders tense, expensive watch glinting under porch light that knew better days. Smells good, he said, like it pained him to admit it.
Sit, I said.
When you've folded 1,000 napkins for 1,000 dinners, some words come out with muscle memory. We ate in the way people eat when food is a prop. After a few minutes of scraping and the clink of glass, I slid the smaller envelope toward him. Read, I said, and breathe. He pulled out the first page, saw the word trust, and flinched like it had a trigger. You really did it.
I really did, I said.
To protect the girls. To protect us from people who see Lakefront as a profit center, not a cradle. He skimmed more, beneficiaries, trustee, restrictions. You just cut me out. I cut out the idea that this place is a thing you can leverage. You are not cut out of this family. You are not cut out of my love. Those aren't things paper can change. He didn't answer. He turned to Daniel's report next. When he hit the section about the resort developer, dates, names, preliminary feasibility, his mouth tightened. He flipped pages too fast, then slower, then stopped. What is this? He tapped a photo of Madison at a restaurant table over blueprints. This could be anything. You're right, I said. It could be anything. So could a ring. So could a promise. The context makes the meaning. He set the report down like it had burned him and stood, pacing to the window that faces the dock. Madison says you're controlling. That you can't handle the fact I make my own choices. Controlling is demanding the keys to a home you didn't build and haven't cared for. Boundaries are saying no when your choices harm other people. I softened my voice. Sit, Lucas. He sat. I reached into my pocket for the compass, turned it so the end lined up with the line David had scratched into the table years ago, a childish thing that somehow became sacred. Your father used to say, true north is where love and truth intersect. Tonight I'm trying to stay on that line. His gaze drifted from the compass to my hands. You shake, he said. I'm old, I said, letting the smile come. Being old is a feature, not a bug. You live long enough. You get a handful of elderly wisdom stories whether you asked for them or not. He breathed out through his nose, a small surrender. She wants to come up Monday, he said. She says we need fresh air and space to reconnect. Monday is when the contractor is resealing the deck. I lied, because sometimes the truth needs a long on-ramp. Also Monday is when Emma arrives to help me swap out storm windows. That part was true. It will not be a good day for reconnection. The phone vibrated across the table.
He glanced.
Madison. Then again.
And again.
She's outside, he said, startled. She just texted she's in the driveway. Of course she was. Predators hunt where the herd gathers. Then let's be decent, I said, standing. We'll meet her on the porch, like civilized people. We stepped into the porch light. Madison unfolded from a black SUV like a magazine ad, all gloss and angles. The lake breeze caught her hair at the ends, expensive perfume fighting the clean pine smell. Her smile was a slot machine light, bright, calculated. Mrs. Harper, she said, holding out a hand she didn't intend to have shaken. We're family now. Call me Maddie. I'll call you what you've earned, I said, not unkindly. I have no appetite for petty, but I save my sugar for pie. She laughed as if I'd made a charming joke, then glided past us like she'd been invited. In the entryway, she paused under the photo of David in his Navy uniform, the one where his smile was all future and no ache.
Cute, she said.
Vintage. Lucas's jaw clenched.
I saw it. He saw me see it.
It was small, but fault lines start small. Why don't we sit? I said, leading them to the living room. I didn't offer drinks. Hospitality is a sacred thing, and you don't pour it into cracked vessels. Madison got right to work. Lucas and I want to spend some time up here, just to breathe, reset, connect. He's been under a lot of pressure. We need healing space. She turned to me. I soft, voice dropped half an octave. Isn't that what you want for your son? Healing. I thought of every time I'd watched Lucas sleep off a fever on that couch, every time David had knelt by the fireplace to coax flame from reluctant kindling. I want my son to live a life where the people around him tell the truth, I said, and where his home isn't a stepping stone to a luxury resort. She blinked. A microflinch. Then the mask slid back into place. You've been fed lies. People are threatened by strong women who dream big. I raised a female engineer in the 80s, I said. Strong women don't threaten me. Grifters do. Lucas stood, an involuntary move. Maddie. She turned on him so fast it whistled. Don't Maddie me right now. Your mother is poisoning you against me. Which is when the front door opened and closed with the practiced ease of someone who belongs here. Rachel called from the hall. Mom? The storm window shipment came early. I can leave them in the garage. Oh. She stepped into the room and took in the tableau in a single breath. Hi, Lucas. Then, to Madison, pleasant and knife-sharp. You must be the reason Mom called a lawyer. Madison's eyes flashed. Who are you? His sister, Rachel said, setting the box down with a thud that made the mantel pictures shiver. The one who learned to read fine print in 2nd grade. Want me to translate the word irrevocable for you? It means you can't charm your way around it. Enough, Lucas said, wounded pride and panic colliding. Both of you. Lucas, I said quietly. He looked at me. Take a walk with your sister. 10 minutes. Madison, and I will breathe. He hesitated, child and man wrestling for the wheel, then nodded and went with Rachel down to the dock, where the boards complained just enough to keep secrets. The room felt bigger without him. Madison stayed standing, hands on hips like a starlet in a screen test. You go after the mother first, I said, because I was tired and the truth is a mercy. You isolate the son. You control the narrative. You dangle a future with just enough sparkle to blind him to the hooks. I lifted the corner of Daniel's report on the coffee table. You're not the first of your kind to visit a house like this. You're just the first to underestimate mine. You think you know me? She asked, voice cooling. I know your type, I said. And I know my son. He's brilliant and generous and lonely in a way that makes him susceptible to people who clap more than they care. She smiled then, small, real, almost weary. You're good, she said, but not good enough. She reached into her bag and pulled out a crisp folder, slid it toward me like a dealer who'd stacked the deck. Mutual representation, she said. A form Lucas will sign so I can handle details while he tackles a time-sensitive work crisis. Media requests, property coordination, boring stuff. Standard language. I didn't touch it. Power of attorney buried under soft words, I said. Try a different county. This one knows the terrain. She shrugged and tucked the folder back, and for the first time something like impatience cracked through. You can't live forever, she said softly, almost kindly. Think how much easier things would be if you didn't fight what's inevitable. The market changes. Families evolve. Why not let this place be what it's meant to be now? This place is meant to hear laughter, I said. To teach kids to tie a bowline. To host Christmases where the tree is always 2 feet too tall. Its highest and best use is us. She laughed again, but this time it sounded like metal. You're sentimental, she said. And sentiment loses to capital every time. Only when people forget who they are, I said, standing because my knees had had enough. And we haven't. Footsteps on the deck. Voices. A gull skated low over the water, caught a draft, and rose. Lucas walked in with Rachel beside him, a little paler but clearer around the eyes. He looked at Madison like a man stepping back from the edge just enough to see the drop. "We're leaving," he told her. "Tonight." Madison's face did a dozen small things in 1 second. "Don't be dramatic. We'll talk tomorrow," he said, but the weight had shifted. Even she felt it.
She turned to me.
"This isn't over." "Oh, honey," I said, too old for pretense, too young to give up. "It's not even the middle." She left with a perfume wake and a slammed car door that made the porch light quiver. We stood, the three of us, in the old house that had seen weddings and wakes, and everything in between. Rachel blew out a breath. Lucas didn't. In the quiet, the compass ticked against the wood in that tiny way compasses do when the world insists on spinning. I reached out, steadied it with one finger, and felt my hand stop shaking. "Mom," Lucas said, voice rough. If I've made a mess." "Messes can be cleaned," I said, because healing starts in small sentences. That's the whole miracle of being alive. He nodded once, like a man who'd found a step in the fog, and for the first time in a long time, I saw my boy again. Outside, the lake exhaled. The wind shifted north. And somewhere deep in the bones of his house, something old and patient settled in for the long work of emotional growth, of family forgiveness, of what the young like to call a comeback and the old simply call mourning. The night Madison left, the house felt like it had exhaled. I could almost hear the wood and stone loosening under the pressure it hadn't asked to carry. The air smelled of pine, and cooling embers from the fire we'd let die down. Lucas sat at the kitchen table long after Rachel had gone upstairs, his hands clasped in front of him, staring at nothing. "I thought I knew her," he said finally, voice low. "I thought maybe she could fill the empty spaces I didn't want to look at." I stayed quiet. Sometimes elderly wisdom means knowing when to let silence do the healing work. He rubbed the bridge of his nose the way David used to when the weight of things got heavy. "She's going to come at me hard," he said. "She doesn't lose quietly." "Then you'd better start thinking like someone who plans to win," I told him. The next morning I woke early. Habit, maybe, or just the residue of years when I had to make David's coffee before his morning commute. The lake was glassy, the kind of stillness that makes you forget storms are even possible. But my gut told me Madison wasn't far from her next move. By mid-morning, my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. "She's been busy," he said without preamble. 3 meetings yesterday, 2 with tabloid stringers, 1 with a development company I've tangled with before. Horizon Properties. They've got a reputation for turning family estates into vacation rentals with a heartbeat. I pressed my palm against the cool granite counter. "Does she have any legal claim yet?" "Not unless Lucas gives her one," he said. "But she's laying groundwork. Whisper campaigns. Trying to paint you as the villain who's keeping her new husband from his rightful inheritance." I thanked him and hung up, already dialing Harper. "Cease and desist letters to every tabloid she's sniffing around," I told her. "And to Horizon, making it very clear she has no authority to speak about this property. I want it in writing, stamped, and ready to wave in anyone's face who tries to misunderstand." Harper chuckled softly. "You always did like to have the receipts." After the calls, I found Lucas on the back deck, staring out at the water with a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. "She's making her rounds," I told him plainly. "Trying to poison the well."
His jaw flexed.
"She called last night. Said she just wants to clear the air. That we've all gotten off on the wrong foot." "And you believe that?" "I want to," he admitted. But after last night, he shook his head. "Part of me's afraid I'll hear what I want to hear if I see her. You know, the old pattern." That was something I'd been waiting for. The crack in his self-assuredness, the moment when the child inside him admitted the truth the man had been avoiding. It was emotional growth, small and fragile, but real. "Lucas," I said gently, "you can love someone and still recognize they're not safe for you. Love and trust aren't the same currency." He didn't answer, but the way he tightened his grip on the mug told me the words had landed. Late that afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. A young woman's voice came through, hesitant but deliberate. My name's Vanessa Diaz, she said. I was a friend of Madison's. I think you should know what she's planning now. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in town, the kind of place with mismatched mugs and a chalkboard menu that smelled of cinnamon scones. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, with restless hands that fiddled with the clasp on her purse. She's meeting with a notary tomorrow, Vanessa said. Wants me to witness a power of attorney document. Says Lucas is too busy to handle property matters himself, so she'll help. I kept my face neutral. And what's really in the document? Buried language that would give her control over anything tied to the Harper family name, including this house. Vanessa leaned in. She also has these fake letters, supposedly from your father, to a woman he never married. She's planning to claim he had an illegitimate child. She's hoping to sell that to the press as leverage. The calm I'd built over the years of widowhood wrapped around me like armor. Do you have proof? Vanessa nodded, pulling a manila envelope from her purse. Inside were copies of the forged documents, text messages, and even a photo of Madison handing a cash-filled envelope to a woman I didn't recognize. She's crossing lines now, Vanessa said. I've done shady stuff, but this is the kind that ruins lives. I'm not going down with her. I promised her Harper would draft an immunity agreement if she cooperated fully. By the time I drove back to the lake house, dusk was pulling shadows across the water. Lucas was waiting by the door.
She called again, he said.
Wants to have lunch tomorrow. Says she has something important for me to sign. Lucas, I said, whatever she hands you, don't sign it. Not until you've read every word twice. Not until Harper has read it too. He studied me for a long moment, and then, for the first time since this mess began, he nodded without argument. Okay, Mom. I watched him walk into the house, and I felt the smallest flicker of hope. Not because the storm was over, far from it, but because maybe, just maybe, my son was beginning to find his own true north. And that's the thing about elderly wisdom. It's not just about protecting what's yours. It's about giving the next generation the tools to protect themselves long after you're gone. The morning of the lunch meeting, the lake looked like a sheet of tarnished silver. The wind had picked up overnight, turning the water restless, choppy, a mirror for my own unease. Lucas was in the kitchen, pacing, a tie hanging untied around his neck. You don't have to go, I told him. I do, he said, not looking at me. If I don't face her now, I'll keep putting it off. And she'll keep pushing. There was a steadiness in his tone I hadn't heard in months. It wasn't bravado. It was something quieter, heavier. Emotional growth looks different on everyone for Lucas. It was this, moving toward the conflict instead of running from it. I slid an envelope across the counter. Put this in your jacket. It's a summary from Harper. Points you need to remember if she tries to get you to sign anything. He slipped it into his inside pocket without reading. Thanks, Mom. The cafe they chose was one of those new places trying too hard to look old. Edison bulbs, reclaimed wood, waiters in leather aprons. I parked across the street in case Lucas needed me, telling myself I wasn't spying, just standing guard. Through the window, I saw Madison arrive exactly on time. She wore white, a calculated choice. People think white says purity. I know better. White is a canvas for projection. She leaned across the table, her hands moving in fluid, coaxing gestures. Lucas sat back, listening. For a moment, I saw the old pattern trying to reassert itself, her leading, him nodding. But then he reached into his jacket and pulled out Harper's notes. He laid them flat on the table and kept his finger on the first bullet point as she spoke. Her expression tightened. She slid a folder toward him. He didn't touch it. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. His shoulders squared. He shook his head slowly. She reached out, fingertips grazing the folder, pushing it closer.
He pushed it back.
Then, and I'll remember this as long as I live, he stood.
Calm.
Deliberate. Put a 20 on the table for his coffee, and said something that made her eyes narrow into slits. Whatever it wasn't loud, but it was final. He walked out into the bright midday glare, spotting me before I could pretend I was just there for a latte. Let's go, he said. In the car, he sat for a minute before speaking. She said if I don't give her what she wants, she'll go to the press with some story about Dad having another family. I told her I'd be interested to see how well forged letters stand up in court. My chest tightened with pride. And the folder? Power of attorney, he said. Exactly like you said it would be. Buried in pretty language about shared responsibilities. I smiled. She underestimated you. No, he said quietly. She underestimated you. And I've been stupid enough to underestimate you too. He looked out at the lake as we pulled into the drive. That won't happen again. That night, we sat on the deck under a sky full of October stars. The air smelled of cedar and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Lucas held a glass of bourbon, his first sip in weeks, and I nursed my tea. You know, he said, this whole thing, it's been ugly. But maybe it's what I needed. To wake up. To see who I am when I'm not trying to prove something to someone who'll never be satisfied. I reached over and covered his hand with mine. That's the strange thing about storms, I said. They wreck the shoreline, but they also clear out what shouldn't have been there in the first place. We sat like that for a long time. No speeches, no force lessons. Just the quiet work of healing, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but you feel it settling in your bones. It was the first night I believed we might actually come out of this intact. 2 days later it happened. Madison went public. I was making soup, chicken, and wild rice, the way David used to like it on cold afternoons, when Rachel's voice came sharp from the living room. Mom, you need to see this. She had her laptop open to a glossy gossip site. The headline read, Lakefront heiress battles controlling mother-in-law over rightful family property. The photo underneath was of Madison, posed just so, standing at the edge of a dock that wasn't ours but looked enough like it to confuse the casual reader. The article was full of loaded language, estranged, secretive, legacy feud. And halfway down, there it was, the forged letter from my father to a woman who never existed, printed in high resolution like it was gospel. Lucas came in halfway through the article, his face going pale as he read over my shoulder. She really did it, he said. She's not just telling her side, Rachel said grimly. She's manufacturing a side. Within hours, local reporters were calling, some polite, others fishing for sound bites. One left a message asking if I'd care to comment on allegations of withholding a family home from its rightful heir. I took a deep breath and called Harper. We go on record, I told her. We don't stoop to her level, but we answer. Every lie gets met with a fact. Harper agreed. And we do it fast. First impressions stick. That evening, we drafted a statement. This home has been in the Harper family for over 6 decades. It is protected by a legal trust to ensure its preservation for future generations. Any documents suggesting otherwise are fraudulent, and we are pursuing all legal remedies. We remain committed to the truth, to protecting our family's history, and to preserving a place of peace and connection for our loved ones. It was direct, calm, and most importantly, verifiable. Harper sent it to every outlet that had run Madison's story. But Madison wasn't finished. The next day, she appeared on a morning talk show in Reno, tears glistening in perfect symmetry as she spoke of being shut out by a woman who refuses to accept me as family. She painted herself as a victim of generational stubbornness, using phrases like healing and moving forward as if they belonged to her. Lucas watched the interview in silence, then shut the TV off. I feel like I don't even know how to respond to this, he said. You don't, I told him. Not yet. You let her burn her credibility by overplaying her hand. You don't fight a storm by screaming into the wind. You wait until it passes, then you start rebuilding. That night, I took out David's compass again, setting it on the table between us. True north, I reminded him. It's not about winning the argument. It's about not losing yourself in it. The next morning, we got a break we didn't expect. Vanessa, the young woman who'd warned me about Madison's plans, agreed to go on record, under oath, confirming the forgeries and the staged meetings with Horizon Properties. Harper moved fast, filing a preliminary injunction to block Madison from making further claims on the house until the matter was settled. The hearing was set for the following week. Court's not my favorite place, I admitted to Lucas as we went over the paperwork. But sometimes family forgiveness starts with drawing lines no one's allowed to cross. Lucas nodded. I want to be there. I need to be there. When the day came, the courtroom was small, with wood-paneled walls and a view of the Sierra foothills through one narrow window. Madison sat at the opposite table in another pristine white dress, her lawyer whispering in her ear. Lucas sat beside me, shoulders squared, eyes steady. As Vanessa testified, laying out Madison's tactics in clear, simple terms, I felt a knot in my chest start to loosen. It wasn't over. Not yet, but for the first time, the truth was on the record, and it wasn't mine alone to carry. When we walked out of that courthouse, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. Lucas looked at me and said, I'm done letting her write my story. And right there, in the shadow of those old courthouse steps, I realized this wasn't just about saving the house anymore. It was about saving my son. It was 3 days before the judge's decision when Madison made her final move. I was at the lake house, arranging logs in the fireplace for the evening, when the phone rang. Lucas's number. She's here, he said, voice taut. Outside my building. Says she just wants to talk, no lawyers, no cameras. Every instinct in me screamed trap. Don't go down there. I think I have to, he said quietly. I need to hear her out, for me, not for her. There's a kind of elderly wisdom that comes from watching enough endings to know how they begin. I didn't like this one. But Lucas had been walking his own path lately, and part of emotional growth is letting people test their own footing. I'll be nearby, I said, just in case. When I arrived, Madison was leaning against the hood of a silver SUV, dressed not in white this time, but in soft denim and a pale sweater, the costume of sincerity. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes flicked past me to Lucas, who stepped out of the building a moment later. Lucas, she began, her voice low, almost trembling, this has all gotten so far away from what we wanted. We don't have to keep fighting. Lucas stopped a few feet away. You mean I don't have to keep fighting you for my family's home? I mean we can build a new story, she said. Forget the papers, the lawyers. Just sign over partial rights. We keep it in both our names and we move forward. I could almost see the hook in the water, glinting under the surface. Lucas shook his head. No partial rights. No deals. You crossed a line, Madison. More than one. Her voice sharpened. So, you're just going to let your mother run your life? That's what this is, isn't it? Her pulling the strings? That's the thing, he said, and his tone carried a steadiness that made my chest ache with pride. Mom didn't make this decision for me. She just made sure I had the truth before I made it myself. For a moment, something slipped in Madison's expression, a crack in the performance. Then she regrouped, eyes hardening. You'll regret this, Lucas. People like your mother always get comfortable until someone finally knocks them off their pedestal. I stepped forward then, not to defend myself, but to end it. This isn't about pedestals, Madison. It's about foundations. And you can't knock down what you never built. She stared at me for a long beat, then turned sharply and got into the SUV. The door slammed, and the car pulled away fast, gravel spitting under the tires. Lucas exhaled, long and slow. I thought maybe, I don't know, that there'd be some part of her that was real. There probably is, I said gently. But it's not the part she shows when she's cornered. We walked back inside together. Something had shifted in him. The rawness was still there, but so was a kind of peace, the kind you only get after standing your ground and realizing you didn't crumble. That night, sitting by the fire, he said, I'm ready for this to be over. Whatever the judge decides, I'm done letting her rent space in my head. That's the real win, I told him. Not the trust, not the house. It's taking back your own story. The morning of the ruling was cold and bright, the kind of Sierra Nevada autumn day, where the air feels scrubbed clean. Lucas and I drove into town in near silence, the hum of the tires the only sound between us. I could feel the weight in his chest, not just about the house, but about what the judge's words might mean for the life he was finally trying to rebuild. The courtroom was crowded for such a small case. Madison sat at the far table with her attorney, posture perfect, chin lifted as if she'd already won. She didn't look at us. Judge Whitman, a tall man with a weathered face and a voice like worn oak, shuffled his papers before speaking. I have reviewed the evidence, including testimony regarding forged documents, the attempted misuse of a power of attorney, and corroborated statements about the petitioner's intent to sell the Harper family property. He paused, glancing over his glasses. The court finds these actions to be coercive and in bad faith. Lucas's hand tightened on my arm. The trust protecting the Harper property, the judge continued, remains in full effect. Furthermore, the petitioner is barred from making any further claims or representations concerning said property. Any violation will be subject to immediate legal penalty. The gavel came down with a crisp crack, and it was over. For a second, no one moved. Madison's attorney leaned toward her, but she was already gathering her bag, jaw tight, eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the room. She didn't look back as she left. Lucas turned to me, exhaling a breath he'd been holding for months. "It's safe," he said, almost to himself. "It's really safe." "Yes," I said. "The house is safe. And so are we." Outside the courthouse, the air was warmer than when we'd gone in. Reporters waited, microphones poised, but Harper intercepted them with a brief statement, redirecting the focus to the importance of protecting family legacies. No dramatics, just the truth. When we got back to the lake house, the afternoon light was spilling gold across the water. Lucas wandered out to the dock, standing where David used to fish in the early mornings. I joined him, the boards creaking under our weight. "This place," he began, then stopped. "When I was a kid, I didn't understand why you loved it so much. It was just home. Now I get it. It's more than walls and windows. It's memory. It's history. It's a map of who we are." I felt my throat tighten. "That's the thing about elderly wisdom stories," I said. "They're not about telling you what to do. They're about making sure you remember why it matters." We stood there for a long time, watching the wind ripple the water. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. Not because the fight was over, but because the right things had survived it. The days after the verdict felt different. Not loud or triumphant, but steady, like the ground finally deciding it was done shaking. The house seemed to breathe easier, the way it does after a long winter storm when the windows no longer rattle in their frames. Lucas stayed for a while, longer than I expected. At first, I thought it was to make sure Madison didn't try some last-minute stunt, but I realized it was more than that. He was relearning how to be here, how to exist in a place without bracing for the next blow. One afternoon, we sat on the deck with mugs of coffee, the lake stretching silver blue before us. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything. About Dad. About us. I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me," I began, but he shook his head.
"No."
"I do. I let someone else's voice drown out yours. I let myself believe you were holding me back when all you were doing was holding me steady." I felt something shift in me then. A piece of the hurt I hadn't wanted to admit to eased, replaced by a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Family forgiveness doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it's just a quiet sentence over coffee that mends more than you thought possible. We started small projects together, sanding the dock rails, repainting the kitchen cabinets. Nothing urgent, just the slow, physical work that leaves room for talking, or for silence, when talking isn't needed. That's where the healing really happened, in those unremarkable moments that stitched life back together. By the second week, Lucas was smiling more. Not the brittle smile I'd seen before, but something looser, genuine. He even joined me on my morning walks along the shoreline, listening as I told old family stories. Some were about David, some about my own stubborn younger years. I noticed he didn't just listen. He asked questions, drawing out the details, wanting to understand. One evening, as the sun dropped low and the lake caught fire with reflected light, he said, "I used to think strength was about never needing anyone. Now, I think it's about knowing when you do." I nodded. That's elderly wisdom talking, whether you've got the gray hair yet or not. When he finally left to return to his own place, the goodbye felt different from the ones before. There was no heaviness, no unspoken worry. Just a hug that lasted an extra beat, and the knowledge that we'd weathered something big together and come out better for it. After he drove away, I stood on the porch, the air cool against my face, and thought about the strange gift of hard seasons. They strip away illusions, test every joint and seam, but if you let them, they leave you with something stronger than what you had before. The lake was calm that night, a perfect mirror for the stars. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see my own reflection clearly again. Winter settled over the lake with its quiet authority, wrapping the shoreline in frost and drawing the sky closer to the earth. The mornings came slow and pale, the afternoons short, and the evenings carried the scent of wood smoke from chimneys dotting the far shore. Life, as it does, found a rhythm again. The calls from reporters stopped. Madison faded from the news cycle, her story overtaken by the next manufactured scandal. The lake house stood just as it always had, weathered but strong, a keeper of stories that no headline could rewrite. One Saturday, Lucas came up with Rachel and her kids. They brought groceries, laughter, and the kind of chaos only children can stir into a place. I watched my grandchildren race across the dock, their boots thudding on the planks, their shouts carrying out over the water. Later, we gathered in the living room, the fire crackling, mugs of cocoa steaming in small hands. The kids wanted a story, and Lucas looked at me. "Tell them the one about the old storm," he said. So I told it, not this whole ordeal with names and dates, but the shape of it. I spoke of a home by the water, of a time when the wind threatened to take it away, and of the people who stood together to keep it safe. I wove in the lessons without naming them, the way elderly wisdom stories have always done, that storms don't last forever, that truth outlasts the lies meant to bury it, and that the people worth keeping are the ones who stay when the winds are loudest. The kids listened with wide eyes. Rachel smiled softly. Lucas's gaze met mine over the heads of his children, and I saw something there I hadn't in years: ease. When the night wound down and the house was quiet again, I stood by the window, looking out at the lake under a sky thick with stars. I thought about the word healing, how it's less about going back to how things were and more about finding a way forward, changed but whole. I thought about family forgiveness, how it sometimes blooms not from a single grand gesture, but from a series of small, steady acts. And I thought about emotional growth, how it sneaks up on you in the middle of ordinary days, until one morning you wake and realize you've been living in it all along. The lake will see more storms. That's the nature of lakes and of life. But we'll weather them, as we always have, with our hands on the same old foundations and our eyes on true north. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance we leave isn't the house or the land. It's the stories, the ones that teach, that bind, that remind those who come after us who they are and where they stand. And that will always be worth protecting. Life has a way of testing us through storms we never asked for. This story is a reminder that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up, holding on to your values, and protecting what matters most, even when the winds are loud and relentless. We learn that healing doesn't come from pretending the hurt never happened, but from facing it with honesty and grace. Family forgiveness often grows slowly, in quiet moments of understanding, and emotional growth happens when we choose integrity over comfort. The greatest legacy we can pass on isn't property or possessions, but the elderly wisdom of resilience, compassion, and truth. These are the lessons that outlast any storm, guiding future generations long after we're gone. So guard your foundations, cherish the relationships worth keeping, and never underestimate the power of your own story. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment with number 1 to let me know you have watched the whole video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to always receive new videos as soon as possible.